Hello y'all and welcome. Thank you so much for taking the time out of your day to check out another one of my videos. Today is one of my favorite videos. It is my Palooza countdown review series where I take the last 10 palettes that I've tried recently and I share with you guys my reviews for all of them in a ranking format. So we start with my least favorite and we work our way all the way up to the most favorite out of the last 10 palettes that I've tried. This series is inspired by Annette from Annette's Makeup Corner. She started the whole last 10 palettes that I tried, ranking them in this fashion, and I always enjoy a good ranking video. So I started doing my Paloozas in a ranking fashion with 10 palettes. Whenever I get to that number, I sit down and film a video like this. And in my Paloozas, I always like to give you guys as much information as possible. So if you're new to this series, if you're new to these videos, along with my review for each of the palettes, I also include swatches of the palettes. I include all the eyeshadow looks that I created with the palette so you can get a feel of the different type of looks I created. And I also share with you any Instagram reels that I might have made over on my Instagram page, and I put them in here just so you guys can see a little bit of the palette in action as I am talking. So that's everything I'm going to include in this video. If you like this style, I have a whole playlist filled with palettes that I've reviewed over the past year, and I think I've been doing this style of giving you guys the eyeshadow looks, the swatches for the palette and all that for a couple years now. So tons of videos, tons of palette reviews on my channel. If you're at all curious, I'll leave the playlist linked up here, but let's go ahead and just jump right into it. I have 10 palettes. Let me just go ahead and throw out a disclaimer before we get into it that all of these palettes were a hit. I did not have one dud of a palette. Not one palette was just like it just didn't jive with me. I really didn't care for it, or the formula just wasn't that good. All these palettes are really nice. So this countdown is going to be very hard because I had to go off of preference a lot, and I feel bad for the palettes that are at the bottom of the countdown because it's like, they're still good palettes. I had to order them some ways. I feel like it's been a long time since I have had a dud of a palette, so that's always nice to see. But that's the one disclaimer I'm going to throw out there before we dive into it. So let's go ahead and get right into it, starting with palette number 10. Alright, I always like to scoot over when I can remember so that I have room to stick up the Instagram reels, and then I'll overlay as I'm talking swatches and the eyeshadow looks across my face as we go. So let's go ahead. Palette number 10. I decided to put this at number 10 because out of all the formulas, now this is eyeshadow formula for mattes and shimmers that I tried out of the 10 palettes, this has to be my least favorite. Even saying that I feel bad because it's not a bad formula. It's just this one ended up at the bottom, and it is the Ace Beaute Nostalgia palette. Now I don't know, I should hold on this side, if this is the reformulated or not. I should have looked that up honestly beforehand. They did send this to me in PR. I know they reformulated a lot of palettes. I don't know if they reformulated this one, but for this formula, it's not bad. I'm not putting it at the bottom and saying it was the least impressive or my least favorite because it's a terrible formula. It worked fine. There were just a few times when I was working with them, specifically when I was trying to build colors on top of each other, that I just personally wasn't very impressed with how the end results was, or how long it took me to kind of get the colors to mesh, that sort of thing. So it's not that the mattes are terrible or anything like that. It just wasn't my favorite to work with. They're very intense. They're very pigmented, especially when you use them alone. You're not trying to like mix and mesh them together. Using them alone, they're absolutely fine. The shimmers are beautiful. There's only 3 shimmers. Lots of mattes to work with. I was really happy with the type of looks that I was able to create on my eyes with this palette. They were very creative. They were very different. And I think my favorite was the last look that I did because it was just so unexpected for me. It was the last look I was doing. I was like, let's try to get something really, that I haven't really done before, that I wouldn't think to grab and create with this palette, and I felt like I got it, like hit the nail on the head, and I was really into that look that day. But yeah, overall it's a very nice palette. I really like the color story. It's fun, especially if you're into the more pinks and reds and purples. I do think you will have a lot of fun with it. It has those, that green and yellow and orange to kind of bring a pop and just bring something else into the palette, but it does lean very heavy on the purples and pinks. So for me personally, with that color story, it didn't land, that's another reason it didn't land super high, because you guys know I love my greens and blues and yellows more so than my pinks and purples, but it still was a lot of fun. I got some fun looks out of it. The shimmers I thought were really nice. They're very easy to pick up. I didn't have any complaints there. They look beautiful on the eyes. They're very smooth and pigmented. They're not anything like incredibly sparkly or like duochrome or anything shifty like that, but they're very nice shimmers that are very opaque when you put them on the eyes. They last beautifully all day. Wear time for this palette I was very pleased with. I didn't have any issues, seeing the shimmers fade away. There was a little bit of kind of transition into my crease throughout the day, but that's not uncommon for me personally, and the amount that it was transferring honestly wasn't that big of a deal for me personally, so I didn't really care about it, but I just want to throw that out. And for the mattes, overall I was very impressed. There was one day I had a little bit of just like disappearing with the mattes on my eyes. Overall, it's a really nice palette. If you like this color story, I do think you will enjoy it, and like I was able to get with the eyeshadow looks that I did, I was able to get different types of looks and different type of color combinations that I first kind of expected to or thought to get with this palette. I do feel like their eyeshadow formula has improved. If you didn't know, I do have the Ace Beaute Vintage Dawn palette behind me somewhere. There's got to be behind me. Oh yeah, right here. One of my favorite palettes is that. It's off screen. I definitely feel like the matte eyeshadow formula in this palette, the Tropical Vibes palette, is a big step up from the formula with the mattes in this palette. Not to say that this is terrible and you can't work with it, but it's just a little bit drier. It's not as creamy and smooth as what I find in the Vintage Dawn palette. So that's something kind of comparison wise if you are curious. And that's why I said in the beginning, I'm not sure if this one was reformulated when they did the reformulation or not, because this is the new formula, I know for sure, because it came out afterwards. So that's why I'm just not really sure with this palette. But yeah, overall, it's still nice, even though like I didn't think the formula of the mattes and whatnot working with them together in creating looks was amazing. It was just a couple times I was like, I don't really like how that's blending, or that took a long time to blend those two together, that type of thing. So it was just a little bit of a But overall, it's a nice palette. Next up for number 9, this had to get towards the bottom because of the color story, and I know this isn't going to be surprising, but this is the Menagerie Flight Club palette. And this palette is a very purple palette, but while it is a very purple palette, I feel like it's too monochromatic of a purple palette, I guess you could say. There's not enough that I can do. While I understand looking at it, it's like, yes, this is a monochromatic purple palette, Katie, like you should only expect to get purple looks. However, with the color variety included in here, I thought it was just a little too limiting for how big the palette was. If this was half the size or even just like a row taken off, then I'd be like, okay, like there's a reason why all the looks kind of look the same, and not even just the same. You guys are going to see my looks. There are differences. You do see subtle differences, but I felt like, especially with the mattes, I think that's where I struggled the most to get, you know, creative and create different type of looks that kind of make this large of a monochromatic palette worth it. With that said though, it's a great purple palette. Like I have one purple palette. I feel like I'm set. I don't really need any others. When it comes to Menagerie's formula, this is a fantastic formula. The mattes are super pigmented. The shimmers are very beautiful, and I feel like overall all of them were pretty easy to pick up, which was nice for me to see, and I always like that with their shimmers. Menagerie's, that's definitely something they've been working on over the last couple years, and I've really grown to enjoy the shimmer formula that they're putting in their palettes. I really wish one of these shimmers had been replaced with a really dark purple matte, because it's definitely something I feel like that is lacking in this palette. Just personally, I need my depth, and while there's some darker, you know, shimmers in here, they don't go that dark when you actually use them on the eyes. So I don't know, I just miss the depth. And for having so many, you know, purple eyeshadows in here, having such a big monochromatic purple eyeshadow, I feel like they could have stuck a really deep, rich, beautiful purple in here, and it would have just went so well with the palette. This palette will stain your eyelids, throwing that out there, making sure I don't forget. Anytime I wore this palette on my eyes, it was stained pink that night when I removed them. So they definitely do stain. Nothing terribly, though I'm someone who doesn't usually stain easily with eyeshadow looks, so keep that in mind. But for me, I would definitely have very pink eyes when I took off my makeup, and then by the next day I do a different look, wash my face at night, and I didn't really see any staining. So it wasn't long lasting for me. Not a big deal personally. Wear time for this is also beautiful. Had no issues with it. The mattes held up beautifully on my eyes. There's so much richness and creaminess when it comes to the mattes. They're beautiful, and then the shimmers are also very pretty. Most of them have some kind of extra sparkle to them, very beautiful on the eyes. They go on pretty pigmented. This shade over here also is beautiful, smooth, nice to work with. This shade is a little chunky, but honestly not that bad, especially considering other palettes I've tried. It's just one of the more looser packed ones, but it still goes on very easily with a brush in my opinion. So overall, I was very happy with this palette. It is purple though, and I'm just not someone super into purple looks. I'm someone who is like, yeah, I'll do a purple look every now and then, but reviewing this palette, I had to do lots of purple looks. So by the time I did my last one, I was like, I'm done. I don't want to do any more purple looks. Thank you. And yeah, overall, I picked this palette up mainly just to have the Menagerie collection when it came to my palettes, because it was the only big palette that I hadn't purchased from them. So I think when I bought their last palette, I went ahead and threw this in, or maybe when I bought the Serenity palette, I threw this into my cart, and I've just kind of just been waiting to try it out. So finally trying out, I'm happy to own it. Like I said, I kind of bought it for the collection just to have all of their larger palettes in my collection. It is very cute in the packaging factor. Like they always do a fantastic job I really like animals, and they do a great job, you know, with their animal artwork on the cover of their palettes. I always like to see what they come out with, and Flight Club is just really cute, very cutely done, and overall I'm just, like I said, happy to have it. But it didn't get super high because it is such a purple palette, and for being so large, I would have just liked, I would honestly, if there had been a really dark purple, I probably would have been like, okay, it's a great, you know, monochromatic palette. But having so many shadows and not having a really deep rich purple, and having some of the looks and some of the mattes specifically be like, oh, you're kind of really close, like you could have had one or the other. That's kind of why I am placing it at number 9, because it's great formula, great purple palette, but just a little repetitive for me, who's not like a purple fanatic. Alright, next up is going to be from Playing in Makeup by Yolondo. This is one of our 5-pan palettes, and it is the Expressions palette. And this is going at number 8, kind of for the same reason as the Menagerie purple palette. And that's because this is a monochromatic palette that was a little too monochromatic for me. Now, I do appreciate a little bit more than the Menagerie palette that was a larger palette. This is small, so I don't feel like they wasted a lot of space and whatnot, just being too repetitive with their colors. So hence why it's getting a step up from the Menagerie palette. But this still, even though there is variety in here, I still struggle to get very creative with it, because when you look at the mattes, when you look at the shimmers, if you changed up the shimmers, then it's like, okay, I can see a difference in your eye look today. But when you're working with the mattes, I really struggled. Like, I think I created 3 looks with this, and each one of them I was like, they kind of all look the same. So as much as I tried, it was very repetitive for me. And for me personally, when I'm trying palettes, I like to try to get different type of looks. So it was just a little too repetitive for me. I don't even know what they could have done to change it up. Maybe it's just me not really being a fan of monochromatic palettes in that way, or I just don't enjoy using them that often, and hence why, you know, monochromatics just maybe don't get that high when it comes to ranking them in these countdown videos. But for whatever reason, I just felt this was a little too repetitive for me, and I didn't like that all my looks kind of look the same. With that said though, the shimmers in here are beautiful. This is just a really nice, really great shimmer. It's got sparkle to it, it's got reflect to it, it's really bright, really beautiful. I love it. This shade down here is like a multi-chrome or a duochrome. I'm not really sure, but it definitely shifts. Like, I can see purple to blue to bright like green. It's really pretty on the eye. So I definitely like the formula. I like the shades in here. I don't know. It was just a little too repetitive. This is a palette that I could get one look I would absolutely love, but then I just don't really care to go back to it and create more looks. So for me, when I made myself create at least 3 looks with it, I was like, okay, like I'm really done at this point. So that's the biggest reason on where I place it in the countdown, is just because it is a little repetitive. The matte formula I haven't touched on yet, but it is so nice. Like Playing in Makeup by Yolanda. These, I think I have 4 of these 5-pan palettes, and each one of them, the mattes are so creamy, so beautiful, so buttery smooth. They feel so nice and creamy on your fingers when you're working with them. They're very pigmented and lovely, and the shimmers are amazing. Like, they are so beautiful. Even the like just shimmer shadows are intensely shimmery. They pack a lot of color to them. They go on very easy. They're very easy to pick up with a brush. They're not super messy, which I love. And overall, I'm super impressed with the mattes and shimmers in these little 5-pan palettes from Playing in Makeup by Yolanda. And if I had to recommend you like one palette or one collection from Playing in Makeup by Yolanda, it would definitely be these 5-pan palettes. Because like I said, I tried 4 of them. I think there's like 15 in her collection, so I didn't try them all, but I tried 4 of them, and all of them I was super impressed with. Like, oh my goodness, such a good formula, so nice to work with, and yeah, I've just been, like I said, super impressed with them. Alright, moving right along. I don't even know what number we're at, but this is the What's Up Beauty Geodes palette. I absolutely love the packaging of this. I know I'm not into purple, but I like purple packaging apparently, because this I think is gorgeous. Like the geodes aspect of it, so beautiful. But we're going to be talking about the inside of the palette, because that's what's most important here. But this palette is really nice, and I was kind of surprised at how high I'm placing this in my countdown, because it is a very neutral palette. However, it's very neutral when it comes to the mattes for sure, but the shimmers are just where What's Up and Beauty just like stand out and like blow my socks off, honestly. I'm always so impressed. And this time they put a green and like a really gorgeous yellow for their special shimmer shadow, so I was like, oh my goodness, I really do love this. And especially when I paired it with this mustard, I really like that look. That was one of my favorite looks, and I created several looks with this palette, you know, kind of playing with all of the shadows. I definitely was least impressed or least excited about the pinks down here. They just kind of were like, oh, okay. I tried them once just to see how they were on my eyes, but I really love playing with this portion down here. The mattes in this palette are so creamy. They're almost like so creamy that they get darker when you use them, which is something that I don't see too often when it comes to eyeshadow palettes. I personally don't mind it, but it's something I like to share. Like this clay, when I saw it, I was like, ooh, that's like a really fun, kind of like a dusky type of green, but when you actually use it, it's actually just like a really good, a really deep dark brown on your eyes. So it doesn't really show up in any way of like a greenish tinge to it. And same like when you use this this shade up here, it looks very light, but when you actually use it and you're blending it in, I was surprised by how dark it does get when you actually put it on your eyes. So just something to note that I definitely want to like throw out there. I'm not saying it's like a con to the palette, but it's definitely something that I think you should be aware of when you're going into either purchase this palette or create looks with this palette. Expect the shades, at least on my type of skin tone, the shades to get a little bit deeper as you work with them on your eyes. The shimmers, as I was saying, is where What's Up Beauty just excels so much. They are so special and beautiful. I'm sure you can tell from the swatches, but they just have so much sparkle to them. They have so much intensity. The majority of the shadows also have a lot of pigment to them, especially that green. That green is my favorite. It's so beautiful. There's a nice amount of pigment to them, so they go on really nice on the eyes and show up easily. I was really happy to see that they pick up easily with a brush as well. I didn't have to struggle or fight to get this on my brush, and I also didn't have to struggle or fight to get it on my eyelid as well. It looks very smooth. It's not textured. I feel like sometimes these more special shadows that looks just so sparkly and so beautiful can make your eyes look more textured or just stand out and be more flaky looking on your eyes, but I didn't find that to be the case with this palette at all. They're very smooth, very beautiful, and yeah, I could go on and on about how lovely this formula is. The only con for me with this palette, like literally the only con, is that the mattes are just so kind of neutralish toned, and well, like I said, I didn't mind it too much because pairing it with the shimmers, they're very pretty, especially with the green and the yellow. I really enjoyed them, but I really want to see What's Up Beauty do like a very colorful palette, because with their formula, I know they will hit it out of the park because their formula for both their mattes and their shimmers are stunning. So I am patiently waiting for a more like pack-a-punch type of colorful color story that they'll do, because both of this palette and the previous one are more neutrally toned. So I'm just gonna wait around here, but if you're someone who likes the neutrals, if you're someone who likes those neutrals with the very special shadows and you like just a couple pops of colors, I can't recommend this formula enough, because like I said, it's just such an impressive, such a beautiful formula when it comes to their eyeshadows. I know it's pricey, I know they're pricey brand, but definitely it would be a brand I would say wait for a sale, and if you really do like it, the formula will not disappoint. Alright, next up in my countdown is going to be another palette from Menagerie. This is a Sugar High palette. I did a multiple looks video with this. I think I did 5 more looks, and then I also had a first impressions. So I have a total of like 6 looks on my channel. If you're curious, I'll leave them linked down below. But yeah, I got a lot of time to play with this palette. I really was able to kind of see how creative I could get, and overall this palette was surprised me in a couple different ways. Because like initially when I saw it, I was like, okay, that's a very interesting color story. Like I don't really see the type of looks I'm going to be able to get, but I bought it because I wanted to see how creative I could get, and it really kind of held true to my first kind of like, I wonder, because there's no really dark deep mattes, and the mattes that you have to work with are very interesting type of colors to work with these type of shimmers. I think someone in the comment of my 5 looks video summed it up really well when they said those are really dark, intense type of shimmers paired with a lot of very light pastel colors, which is just something that I personally often don't mesh together when I'm creating looks. For me personally, I like a lot of deep, bright, bold colors when it comes to the mattes and in my crease, and then I like a lot of like light, bright. They can be bold too, but I, for the most part, like the lighter, brighter type of shadows to be on my lid. And I definitely found that to be the case when I was creating looks. I created a lot of pastel looks. Like when I was looking at this palette, I was like, okay, this is a nice little rainbow palette. It's gonna be so much fun. And then I started working with it, and I'm like, oh my goodness, I should have included this in my like top pastel palettes for 2022, because the amount of pastel looks that I was able to so easily get with this palette surprised me. And that's something I wasn't expecting when I went into this palette and was, using it for the first time. I think especially because you have shades like Ruby and Pouch Protective and Falling with Style in here, you think it's a much deeper type of palette. But if you kind of cover those and look at the rest of the palette, it's like, yeah, it's pretty pastelish. And especially with this palette, the matte formula, while it is still a very nice formula, it's definitely a much thinner formula. Not even thinner in like a bad way. It's definitely a much thinner formula that I'm used to with Menagerie. If you touch this, and then if you touch like the Serenity palette from Annette's Makeup Corner, or like the Whale Song or something, you can definitely feel a difference with the mattes. It's just a little bit drier, a little bit thinner of a formula with this Sugar High palette than I'm used to. With saying that though, it goes on the eyes very nicely. It's still very pigmented when I'm working with it, and while it starts a little bit more sheer and not as intense and like saturated as I'm used to with Menagerie, I can still build it up, as you guys saw in my 5 looks that I did. It's just something that I have to kind of work at to build up, whereas usually when it comes to Menagerie's formula for their mattes, it's like you tap in and you tap on your lid and it's like boom, all the saturation is there. So it's definitely something different and new with Menagerie's matte formula that I'm not really sure if I love or hate yet, so I'm gonna kind of just keep trying their formula, keep trying their palettes as they come out, and decide as we go along. In this palette, it was fine. I didn't love it for sure, but I also didn't hate the formula. But I can say with their shimmer formulas, I like the formula in this palette. I think the only one that I was kind of like, didn't really care for was Sugar Cube, just because it was a little bit chunky. But all the other ones were nice to pick up. They were very smooth on the eyes. They were very pigmented when you put them on with a brush. I could pick them up easily with a flat brush. They're not making a mess in my palette, which sometimes has been the case with Menagerie's formula in the past. So I do like where they're going with their shimmers. So that's where with this palette, it's kind of like a tug and pull for me when it comes to Menagerie, because I really like where they're going with their shimmers, but I don't love so much where they're going with their mattes. So I'm just going to kind of continue to see where Menagerie goes from here in their formula. But overall, it's a very interesting palette. It's a very unique palette. I can't say that it's like getting the top of my favorite Menagerie palettes that they've ever launched for sure, because there's just other color stories I love more. But it's a fun, interesting color story, and definitely a palette that I enjoy getting a couple looks out of, and definitely would be a palette I think I would enjoy more if I could bring in some really deep tones as well to go along with it. But overall, it's a nice palette. Just kind of depends on what you like when it comes to the formula for your mattes, the formula for your shimmers, and then what you like in your outer corner, if you need those dark colors or if you like the more pastel look. All right, swinging back around. I think this is number 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 5, we're going back to Playing and Makeup by Yolanda, and this is the Basics palette. This is an all matte palette that I had a lot of fun with. I paired this with the Saints, Angels, Sinners, Get Lucky palette and a couple other just like creamy type of eyeshadows for lids, and then I did a couple looks that were all matte. It's a really nice palette. Playing and Makeup by Yolanda, her shadows pack a punch. Now with this being red, I feel like oftentimes the reds and the really hot pinks can feel dryish, and I definitely feel like this red, this deep red, is a bit more dry, but I mean, for being a bit more dry, like there's still a ton of pigment on there. Like, not saying that is not pigmented at all. The red does just feel a touch dry. However, when I was working it into eyeshadows, there was no, like you couldn't tell that it was a dry shadow just from working it on your eyes, because it is so intensely pigmented. It is so beautiful to work with. It meshes with colors so beautifully. Playing and Makeup by Yolanda has an outstanding matte formula, and I mean, she hit the nail on the head with the red and the purple. I was very pleased with both of them and how they worked into looks and how I was able to get them to show up on my eyes. All the shadows in here, and this palette specifically, were just so bright and intense. I created some very fun sunsetty type of eye looks. I created all matte looks, like I said, which I do enjoy. I got more of an all matte look going on today. But yeah, overall, very impressed. I feel like I'm reviewing so many Playing and Makeup by Yolanda palettes in this video. It's kind of getting a tad bit repetitive, so I hope you guys don't mind. It just ended up that I finished out trying all these palettes around the same time, so I'm so sorry about that. But if you like this color story, if you want a good all matte palette that you can kind of incorporate whatever type of shimmers that you want into it, this is a great color story. And like I said, these 5-pan palettes are just so good. Like, I can't recommend them enough. I know this review for this one is going to be a bit shorter because it's all mattes. It's a 5-pan palette. I've already talked about a 5-pan palette, and like, I don't know what else to tell you guys except show you guys the swatches, show you guys the looks that I got from it, and just kind of rave about it a little bit more. But I definitely do recommend them. This is another one that was very easy to work with, very intense. Like this matte pink, I mean, you guys already saw from the swatches that I showed you guys on the screen, but it is an intense matte pink. So if you want intense, bold colors when it comes to your mattes, these palettes from this collection from Playing and Makeup by Yolanda are outstanding. They're just so pigmented, so saturated, and yeah, I'm just very impressed with them. Okay, another Playing and Makeup by Yolanda, and this is the last 5-pan palette that I'm going to talk about. So again, I'm so sorry that this is like just very repetitive from me today, but this is the mixture palette. This is what I have on my eyes today, and this one I had the most fun with out of all the 5-pan palettes, so hence why it's getting so very high in my countdown. This palette is a ton of fun. I should throw out a disclaimer. This shadow down here is a mess. I don't think it's the palette's fault. Like, I don't think it's the formula's fault. My son got into it and spilled it all over the floor, and so I had to put it back in and press it, and ever since then it's just been a very loose mess. But like I said, I can't really tell you if that's just how the eyeshadow formula is or if it's because my son dug it all out and I tried to repress it. I can tell you though, however, that this shade is the most intense, sparkly, beautiful, shifty type of eyeshadow of all the 5pan palettes that I tried from them. So that's saying something. Like, it is dark, but it is a beautiful dark shade, dark shimmer that I enjoyed working with. There's so much sparkle in here. There's so much shiftiness. Like, straight on, I know you guys see the blue. I'm trying to be careful to not like dump it out. But from this angle, I see a deep purple. It swatches beautifully on my finger, on my eyes. Today, I'm using it just on top of my wing, which I know is going to be a little hard to see, but hopefully in the close-ups, you guys can really see. It's just a little pop of shimmer in this very matte look that I thought was a lot of fun, and I wanted to try it for my last look with this palette. And then moving on to the mattes, again, it's going to be a broken record here, but her mattes are so nice. Her mattes are so nice. And another reason this is getting so high is because while this is only a 5pan palette, I felt like I was able to get so creative when it came to the looks that I got from this palette. As you guys can see from me throwing up all the looks that I created from this palette. Like, there's only 4 mattes, but I was able to use them in different ways and interchange them in different ways that I felt like each one of the looks, like none of them were so close. I was kind of like, that's kind of repetitive, Katie. Each one had something different to it, and that's what I like in a palette. And even though it's only a 5pan palette, I feel like all 4 looks that I created were different in their own unique way, and I love that I could take a 5pan palette and create 4 different looks. I hope that makes sense, but that's why this is getting the highest of all the 5pan palettes, because I felt like I was the most creative and I was able to do the most different type of things with this palette. So it's definitely my favorite personally. Besides that though, like I said, the mattes are creamy, the mattes are blendable, the mattes are so intensely pigmented. These 2 shades down here are very light, but they still pack a punch when it comes to their color. They still blend into these darker shades very well. It takes a little bit of extra work, maybe because they are so light and you're blending them into such deep colors, but I felt like I was able to get the blend between, let's see, I used this green and then this blue. I was able to get that blend pretty easily. Didn't take all that much extra time, but just something to keep note is that there's not that medium tone between the two, so you do have to work a little bit to get such deep colors to blend effortlessly into such lighter tones. But yeah, it's a color story that I was like captured by the first time I saw it. It was definitely one of those palettes I was like, yes, when I went to buy these 5pan palettes, I was like, yep, I definitely want mixture. And I'm so glad I picked it up because it is my favorite from the 5pan palettes. So last time we're going to talk about the 5pan palettes in this video, but just once more time, if you want my recommendation, go check out her 5pan palettes. Like I said, she has like 14 or 15 in the collection. So I'm sure there's a color story that you like. And if they're anything like the 4 that I have, I can vouch for how beautiful the matte formula is and how beautiful the shimmer formula is. So definitely worth it, and they're not too expensive. I think they're around $14–15. So yeah, definitely highly recommend them. Okay, this is number 3. This is number 3, very high on my countdown, and it is an all shimmer palette. Are you guys surprised? I'm surprised. You guys gotta be surprised. But it is the Saints, Angels, Sinners Cosmetics Get Lucky palette. I don't know what I was expecting when she sent this to me to try out, but whatever I was expecting, I was blown away. Like, I was so shocked by how nice this palette was. And I just recently shared a first impressions that was recorded a long time ago, so I'll leave it linked up here and down in the description box. But if you want to see these in action, I have a video where I put these on my eyes. I think I used the middle row and I was just blown away. But I use this palette so very much. I think I used it 9 or 10 times in the last 10 palettes that I've tried, and that's a lot for me to create that many looks. I mean, it is a shimmer palette, so I wanted to make sure I was using all of them. And I just had so much fun with this palette that I used it just about any chance I got. So yeah, I have a lot of examples to show you guys, but this palette just blew my socks off. Now, when I saw it, I was like, okay, that's one of those very special type of shadows that just, you know, they always look so special and like they have so much shift to them. But I'm always kind of nervous with those type of palettes because some of them can be very textured and I don't like textured, or some of them can be very loose and I don't like very loose, messy eyeshadows. So I was very skeptical when I went into this, but I'm happy to report that each one of these 9 shadows are incredibly smooth. They pick up effortlessly with a brush. They have so much sparkle in them when you put them on your lid. They are gorgeous. Like, there would be times that I finish my look and I'll go check in the mirror, like at my bathroom, and I would do this and you would just see all this sparkle. It's gorgeous. They're pigmented. Some of them are more those topper translucent type of shadows that, depending on what you pair it with, they kind of take on a different look. However, even with those shadows, which I think Rabbit's Foot was the most one, it still looks very pigmented on the eyes. Even though when you swatch, it's like, oh, it doesn't have a ton of color. It's more like that shine. Trust me when I say that you put this on your eyes and it will look so pigmented, so smooth, you'll be impressed. I paired this with a blue look and I put this all over my lid and it was just like an icy white, reddish hue, like it had a reddish shift to it. It was beautiful, and it didn't look see-through, translucent, or anything like that at all. So very impressed with the pigmentation of these. Like I was saying, like I like an eyeshadow that packs a punch and you can see color. I'm not that kind of like just a wash of color and some sparkle on the lid. I don't like that when it comes to my shimmers, and none of these were like that at all. And I'm sitting here trying to think, like, was there anyone that kind of just was like, you know, not as impressive as the others? Maybe Four Leaf Clover. Yeah, Four Leaf Clover, I remember just being more of a typical type of pink, shiny color, but that's it. Everything else, there was something special about them that whenever I used them with looks, I was blown away by how beautiful they were. Wear time on these is pretty darn good. Now, these are very shifty type of shadows. They're very like smooth, as I was saying. So I definitely saw if I didn't use a glitter primer, and if I didn't really make sure, you know, a couple days I even tapped a little bit of a glitter primer or like a liquid glitter sealer on top of my look. If I didn't do that and I just like put them on, there would be transfer all over the place, like up into my brows for sure, and there would also be a little bit of wear down. But if I did use some type of glitter primer at the very least, I was very happy with the wear time that I got from the shadows. And like I said, there was a couple days that I even put a little bit of, like, I have an NBA kind of liquid glitter. It's like a clear, almost looks like water, and I would tap it over the look just to help seal it in and then wait for it to dry. And on those days, I really didn't notice hardly any transfer or fading with my shimmers on my lid. So I was very happy about that. So maybe not the greatest wear time depending on how oily your eyelids are or how much prep you put into them, but definitely so very beautiful. I feel like it's worth the extra effort for me to go to prep it with a glitter primer and seal it if I'm really wanting it to stay put, because these are just so beautiful and just so special. I don't even know if you can get it anymore. That's another thing I forgot. I think it might be discontinued because she doesn't keep the palettes too long. If you can get it, and if you like any of the looks that I did with it, definitely highly recommend this. All right, palette number 2. Last Playing in Makeup by Yolondo palette that I'm going to talk about, and this is the Color Scheme Pro 777 palette. It's a big old palette. It's a green palette. Are you guys surprised that this made it to my number 2 spot? I will say that I feel like this was a touch big for an all green palette, and this is coming from a green lover. It is a touch big and at a few points a little bit repetitive and excessive for me personally when it comes to the type of palettes that I like for a green palette. So even though I'm at love green and I loved every single look that I created with this, it is at number 2 because of those few things about the palette that I was just like, it could have been like 1 or 2 rows less and you could have taken out some of this repetitiveness, and then maybe I would have liked it just a little bit more. It might have got it at number 1, but it is getting at number 2 because it is just such a great palette. It is fantastic. There are so many possibilities with this, and I am working on a 7 looks palette that I just finished up. I haven't published it yet, but I am working on it, and I hope to get it up before this video goes live. So if it's live, I'll leave it linked down below, but it's a 7 looks with this, and I feel like each one of the 7 looks are very different from each other, and the looks that you get, you might not necessarily think come from this green theme palette. So I like that about it. It's a lot of versatility. I say that all the time. I like to be able to get different type of looks, and the way she included these more blues, purples, and pinks in this palette really make this palette very versatile. Like I said, there were several looks that I created that just looking at the eyeshadow look that I did, you would not have guessed it came from this green theme palette, because I could just stick to the purples, the blues, or the pinks and create so many different type of looks that were absolutely beautiful. So while you might initially look at this and not think that there's a whole lot of like pops of colors other than green in this palette, Playing in Makeup by Yolondo put just enough to make it very, in my opinion, very versatile in that aspect, and you're able to create so many different type of looks. For me, like I said, where this gets too repetitive, and this is coming from a green lover, too repetitive for me is with the greens. If you really look at these lighter tone greens, even these mid-tone greens, so many of them are very, very similar that I had to be really careful when I was doing my looks to go back to the same shade, because I was like, oh, I'm gonna grab this one, and then I'd start using eye look and then be like, oh wait, did I grab this or this? Because like they literally look the same when you're using them on your eyes. For me personally, I don't love that in a palette, but I do understand people are telling me like, hey, if you got this palette and you went through all of this and you didn't want to have to buy another palette, it's nice to know that you have this whole one that's basically the same. So if you're someone who buys large palettes with that in mind, like you like that aspect of it, then I think you'll love this. But for me, it was just a little bit repetitive. Same with the more deeper greens and the mid-tone greens. The greens were just a little too repetitive. And I know it's crazy for me to say that because I love greens, but I'm saying it. The mattes and shimmers in this palette are very nice. Now I'm gonna say this very carefully, but they're not quite as nice as the mattes in the 5-pan palettes. Not to say that they're not good. Please hear me when I say that. They are still very pigmented. They still blend so beautifully together, and especially the deeper tones, they perform just as beautifully as the little 5-pan palettes. Where I see a little bit of difference and just not as like impressed or blown away, I guess you could say, with the formula, is with the lighter tone mattes, because they're just a little bit more thin. And I did try other lighter tone mattes in those 5-pan palettes, like the green that I have on my eyes today, the lighter green. It shows up so beautifully, but with these, especially like this yellow and even this shade here, but I remember the yellow when I was using them in looks, it was just a little bit thin and I had to really build it up, or I just had to work with it a lot to really get it to show up on my eyes. And that's something that I didn't notice in her little 5-pan palette. So just something to throw out there. I still think the formula and the formula of these mattes is very nice. It's just a little bit thinner than her smaller palettes. Something to keep in mind. And then the shimmers in here, all the shimmers, I gotta keep moving this around because it's getting heavy, my arm's getting tired. But all the shimmers in this palette are really nice as well. I tried her pastel palette that was a larger palette like this, and I remember I think there was like 5 or 6 shimmers in that palette, and I only really kind of enjoyed 2 of them. No, with this palette, I enjoyed all of them. All of them are very, very nice, and some of them are a little bit more special than others, like this shade here, this shade up here. I was really impressed by how intensely sparkly they were, how, beautifully, and just a little bit extra special when you put them on your eyes. All of them across the board have beautiful pigmentation to them. Like, they pick up very easily with a brush. They go on your eyes very easily. They stand out very easily. Like I said, check out my 7 looks. I feel like that's a great way to see how these perform because I used all the shimmers. And there's only, let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. There are 10 shimmers total in this palette. I thought it was a nice array of different shimmers. I really liked all the shimmers in here. Like I said, very easy to pick up, very easy to go down. They look beautiful on the eyes. They look so sparkly and smooth. Yeah, overall, it's just gonna depend on what you like. I definitely am not a fan of the cover. Not to like dog on it or anything. It is what it is, but I just don't think it's anything like, ooh, like I can't wait to display it back here. I would have preferred if it was clear and I could display that because I think that's prettier, but it is what it is. That's probably the biggest downfall, is just that it's not a pretty artwork on the cover. But that's just me being a little petty here, because that's literally, the biggest downside, I guess you could say, of this palette, because everything else about this palette is really nice and I did really enjoy it. All right, coming in at number 1, it is going to be the Blend Bunny Cosmetics Blends Palette. Why did I sleep so long on this brand? I don't know. Like, everyone was telling me how amazing this palette was, how amazing this brand was, and I bought this long ago, anticipating like trying it like last year sometime, and I just never got around to it. And now I finally have, because I had that Get Lucky palette. I was like, perfect, those two will pair great together. And I was able to create so many looks with that Get Lucky palette, but I also created several just all matte looks as well. Oh my goodness, this blends so beautifully. Like, the pigmentation, the way these blend together, the gradients that you get with this palette, it's just perfection. Like, she did a fantastic job creating this palette. It's an all matte palette, so if that's something you don't love, or if that's something you do want to have, it's just an all matte solid rainbow palette that includes, like, it's got the gray tones down here along with the browns as well, so you can get neutrals or more gray tone colors. It's got everything in this palette, and it is fantastic. Like, the formula is so nice. The colors are so smooth. They're very, very soft. Like, when you touch them, they're so buttery smooth. Like, you touch it and it's just creamy. It's just creamy and so pigmented. They all work so beautifully together. I love how bright this red is. I love the orange tones. They got a hot pink in there. They got the purples. She did a great job with this. I feel like everyone's raved about this for so long. Like, what can I say in my review that would be different from what everyone else has said? But I can definitely tell you that it's a great, great palette, solid palette, a great matte formula. It's definitely a palette that I'm happy to have in my collection, and happy to have this palette for anyone who asks me about like a rainbow matte palette. This is gonna be number 1 that I recommend, just because it's so nice and such a solid formula. It's a small indie brand. It's not that expensive considering how many colors you get. You can wait for a sale. It's just a really great recommendation all around. And yeah, I was very, very impressed. I was even impressed with the gray. I did a gray toned look one day. You guys are going to see, obviously, all the looks that I did, but I wanted to use that gray because I remember using the gray in the Lunar Beauty palette. I forget, Eternal Eclipse. I was trying to use the gray tones to see if I enjoyed grays. So when I saw this had a gray and a black and a white, I was like, I'm going to create a very gray tone look, and I want to see if I like how the gray blends out, because I feel like most times, anytime that I've worked with grays, I don't like how it blends out. It looks patchy. It looks weird, it looks skippy, it just looks like I did a bad job blending. And so I tried this one, and I am happy to report that this Blend Bunny blends gray tone. It's called, what is it, Intuition in this palette. This gray is beautiful. It blended out beautifully. Like, there was no kind of catching issue. There was no patching. There was no weird, you know, translucent look to it. It blended into the black beautifully, and I was so impressed. So I'm happy to say this is the first time I've tried a gray eyeshadow on my eyes, and I've actually really liked how my look turned out. It's got a great formula. It blends beautifully. Blend Bunny blends. All the shades in here blend amazing. She also has a Surge palette that's like an all matte except for one row of like beautiful looking shimmers that I'm kind of tempted to get, but I'm gonna hold off and wait for her next launch because I'm sure whatever palette she does next is gonna be great. I wouldn't mind if she did more like curated color stories, like smaller palettes. I don't know if she's at all interested in going that direction, but yeah, overall, this easily claimed the #1 spot because I couldn't find a single fault with it, so it had to get #1. Okay, y'all, per usual, we have come to the end of another very long video. I am hot, I am tired, I am sweaty, I am out of breath, and we are done with this video. I hope you guys enjoyed it. I always enjoy doing these videos, but they definitely, especially when I'm pregnant, take a lot out of me. So I was super excited that I had the time today to sit down and get this video done because I've been excited to share these looks with you guys. I've been excited to share these reviews for these palettes with you guys. So finally sitting down, and I'm gonna move on and try another 10 palettes. But anyway, that is gonna do it for my Palette Palooza Countdown review series. I hope you guys enjoyed hearing all the reviews for these palettes. Let me know your thoughts down below. As always, I really enjoy hearing from you guys, and let me know if you have any of these palettes that I reviewed today and what you think about them. So that is gonna do it for me. I hope you guys enjoyed it. As always, if you want to continue getting daily content from me, I'm over on Instagram. I'm LadyKatie92 over there. Post reels, up close eye swatches, as you guys saw during the video, lots of reels and whatnot. So I would do that all over there just to give you guys some more content. It's just a shorter form content, so easier for me to share more looks that I do over on my Instagram with the palettes that I am currently testing. And yeah, with that said, that's gonna do it for me. Thank you guys once again, and I'll see you guys in my next video. Bye guys.